I am Detective Davis. This is a lawful order. You are interfering with an active scene, and I need you to back up right now.
Stop right there. What are you doing out here? A voice rang out from behind, decisive, without greeting or introduction. The man walking stopped. He turned slowly, his hands hanging naturally, showing no sign of panic. Just walking to dinner, officer. The police officer took another step, standing directly in front of him, completely blocking the sidewalk. The streetlights reflected off the badge on the officer's chest. Yeah? It's a little out of your way, isn't it? He tilted his head, examining her from head to toe. Let me see some ID. The man didn't react immediately. He maintained a calm gaze. Am I being detained? The question wasn't raised in a loud voice, nor was it provocative. It was simply a legal question. The police officer paused for a very brief moment, then gave a faint smile. Unless what? Hand it over. The man nodded slightly. He reached into his jacket, slowly and carefully, then pulled out a thin leather wallet. He opened it and turned it towards the police officer. Here you go. Federal credentials. The policeman glanced at it, but didn't touch it. A sneer escaped his lips. Yeah. Okay. You print that off the internet? The man's expression remained unchanged. It's real. I'm a special agent with the FBI. That moment, instead of ending the standoff, actually escalated the situation. The police officer shook his head. Save the lecture. He stepped closer, closing the distance. Turn around. The man remained still. No resistance. No compliance. Officer, he said, his voice even and clear. I haven't done anything wrong. The words hung in the air. The sidewalk was still bustling with people. Cars were moving at a steady pace. Nothing unusual, except for this pause. And in just a few minutes, a decision made here, based on emotion rather than law, will cost an entire city millions of dollars. It was 7:42 p.m. The location is North Wilk Road, Arlington Heights, Illinois, a street not far from the city center, where restaurants begin to fill up as night falls. The streetlights are brightly lit. Pedestrians are not uncommon. Traffic is normal. More importantly, no emergency calls were made. There were no reports of suspicious behavior. No description of the suspect. No events warranted police approaching a pedestrian on the sidewalk at that time. The man being stopped is Malik Armand Graves, 41 years old. He was a federal agent with the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. That evening, he had just left the office after work and was walking to a familiar restaurant for dinner. There was no rush. There was no evasion. There was no violation of any law. The contact began not because of what he did, but because of how he looked and where he was. In later reports, this stop was described in neutral terms, pedestrian contact. But in reality, it was an unprovoked blockade. Within the first few minutes, the question shifted from, "What are you doing?" to, "Do you have the right to be here?" And it was that change that caused everything to go off track. No one on that sidewalk knew that this standoff would become a civil rights record. No one knew that body cameras were recording every word, every silence, every unnecessary escalation. And certainly, the police officer standing there had no idea that the decision he had just made would be reviewed, analyzed, and cited in detail in a $4.7 million lawsuit, because from that moment on, this was no longer a normal stop. It has become a much bigger question. Are laws enforced based on behavior or on feelings? The police officer standing on the sidewalk that night was Brandon Keegan Holt. He is 33 years old and has served 7 years in the Arlington Heights Police Department. His shift is the night shift. The patrol area is classified as low incident, high visibility, few incidents, but a presence is needed to create a sense of control. In his personnel file, Holt is described as proactive, decisive, and unhesitating in his approach to clients. Those assessments, on paper, sound positive. But there's another detail that comes with them. There had been previous verbal complaints about Holt's approach to the public. None resulted in formal disciplinary action. None were serious enough to be recorded as violations. But they all shared a familiar pattern. Unnecessary questioning. A confrontational tone. And a notable recurring theme, a failure to stop when legitimately questioned. That evening, Holt sat in his patrol car, watching the flow of people on North Wilk Road. The restaurants were starting to fill. Families, couples, and employees leaving work were walking home. Everything went as usual, until he saw a black man walking alone. The man did nothing remarkable. He didn't run. He didn't avoid eye contact. He didn't violate any pedestrian traffic rules. But Holt still slowed down. In those few seconds, an assessment is formed. Not based on behavior, but on feeling. A decision is made not through radio, not through reports, not through any specific evidence. He parked his car, got out, and blocked the man's path on the sidewalk. The body cam automatically activates. From that moment on, every word and action was recorded not just to see what happened, but to answer the question of why it happened. And what the investigators would later realize was not a spur-of-the-moment mistake. It's a template. When Holt got out of the car, he didn't begin by stating the reason for his visit. There was no explanation, no formal greeting. He stood directly in front of the man, blocking the entire sidewalk and forcing the other man to stop. "Hey, Holtgui, where you headed?" The question rang out before the man could say anything. It wasn't a supportive tone, it was a test. "Dinner," the man replied. His voice was calm, not overly brief, no beating around the bush. Holt tilted his head, observing her from head to toe, then took another half-step closer than necessary. "You live around here?" That question wasn't meant to gather information. It was meant to determine the right to be present. The man looked straight ahead. "I'm just walking to eat. Is there a problem?" Holt didn't answer directly. He glanced quickly at the shops, then turned back. "What are you doing in this area?" The way people ask questions has changed. It's no longer "where are you going?" but "why are you here?" In that moment, Malik Graves understood perfectly what was happening. He had faced similar questions before. Not always direct, but always carrying the same implication. He didn't belong here. He kept his voice even. "I'm walking. Same as anyone else." Holt clenched his jaw slightly, then moved his hand toward his waist. "Mind telling me what you're doing out here?" The question was repeated, but the tone was different. It was no longer a question. A few people walking behind slowed down, a curious glance. Then they continued walking. The contact hasn't explicitly violated the law yet, but it's gradually deteriorating. From observation, suspicion, imposition. And with just one more order, that boundary will be completely crossed. Holt did not answer the man's question. Instead, he issued an order. "Let me see some ID." The statement was short, decisive, and without any explanation. It didn't say what he was suspected of. It didn't say why he was under investigation. Malik Graves didn't move. He kept his gaze calm. "Am I being detained?" That's a legitimate question, and it demands a clear answer. Holt exhaled sharply through his nose, as if the question had offended him. "Don't make this difficult." "Then tell me the reason for the stop," Graves said, keeping his voice even. A brief silence fell between them. Holt looked around, as if searching for a reason that never existed. Finally, he said, "You're being stopped because I said so." That moment marked a turning point. The interaction was no longer observational. It became an imposition of power. A few people walking behind glanced over. A couple slowed down. No one said anything. No one intervened. Graves remained in the same position. "Officer," he said, "I haven't done anything wrong." Holt didn't answer. Instead, he took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "ID." Now, Graves understood that the situation had entered a new phase. He didn't want to escalate, but he also couldn't disregard his rights. "Officer," he said slowly, "I'm a federal agent." Holt chuckled softly. A short, dry laugh. "Sure you are." But then, Graves reached into his jacket, and the next moment will lead the officer to believe he's dealing with a liar, when in reality, he's just made the biggest mistake of his shift. Malik Graves reached into his jacket pocket, slowly and deliberately. He didn't want any movement to be misinterpreted. From his jacket pocket, he took out a thin leather wallet. opened it, and held it at chest level, pointing it towards the police officer. "Here you go, Annoy." Federal credentials. Streetlights illuminated the metal badge and identification card inside. Name, photo, federal agency. Holt glanced at it. He didn't pick it up. He didn't read it. He didn't go closer to examine it carefully. A sneer rang out. "Yeah, okay, Holtnoy. You print that off the internet." Graves remained in the same position. "It's real. I'm a special agent with the FBI." Instead of stopping, Holt shook his head. "Save the lecture." He stepped closer, closing the distance unnecessarily. "Put that away." "Graves, Khomhatai. You asked for identification. I identified myself." Holt tilted his head, his eyes turning cold. "That's not identification. That's a prop." "Prop?" Graves repeated, unable to hide his surprise. Holt finally reached out, but only lightly gripped the edge of the wallet with 2 fingers, as if unwilling to touch it. He didn't look at the name. He didn't read the agency. He just glanced at the photo, then looked up at Graves. "You don't look like FBI, Holt. No." That statement fell like a heavy period. Graves replied immediately, his voice still under control. "What does the FBI look like?" Holt clenched his jaw. "Don't get smart." "I'm not, Graves Noy. I'm asking a legitimate question." Holt turned his head slightly, raising his hand to the microphone on his shoulder. "Dispatch," he said. "I've got a male subject refusing to cooperate. Possible impersonation." From that moment on, the conversation was no longer about showing identification. It has become an accusation. And once the accusations are made, there's no easy way back. After the accusation was broadcast on the radio, the atmosphere on the sidewalk changed noticeably. Holt lowered the microphone and looked directly at Malik Graves. His gaze was no longer scrutinizing. It carried a decision. "Turn around." "Antanoi. Hands behind your back." Graves didn't move. But he didn't back down either. "For what?" he asked, his voice calm. Holt didn't answer immediately. A brief silence ensued, as if he were searching for a suitable reason to speak. "Obstructing," Holt said finally. "Obstructing what?" Graves asked again. Holt offered no answer. Instead, he took another step forward, closing the distance between them. His hand hovered near the handcuffs. "Don't make this worse," Holt said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not making it worse," Graves dapped. "I'm standing still." A few people slowed down behind. A car rolled along slowly, its window rolled down. A phone was raised, openly displayed. Holt realized that. He shifted his body, turned his shoulder, trying to block the view of the person who was filming. "Listen to me, Holtnoy, Gyeongathun. I don't know who you think you are, but you don't belong out here, flashing fake badges and arguing with police." Graves looked him straight in the eye. "I belong wherever the law allows me to be." Holt turned his head and pressed the microphone button again. "Dispatch, expedite, possible impersonation, non-compliant." The word non-compliant echoed, heavier than any action Graves had taken. Graves took a deep breath. He had tried to avoid this moment, but it had arrived. He slowly reached into his pocket, took out his phone, and held it in a visible position. "I'm making a call," he said. Holt smirked. "Who are you calling? A lawyer?" "No," Graves replied. "Back up." At that moment, the composure on Holt's face began to crack. Malik Graves held the phone up, slowly and clearly, so the police officer could see every movement. "I'm making a call," he repeated. Holt reacted immediately. "Put the phone away." "No," Graves said. His voice wasn't any louder, but it was firm. Holt took half a step forward, raising his hand as if to stop him. "I said put the phone away." "I'm within my rights," Graves dapped. "I'm not resisting." The confidence in that voice wasn't a challenge. It came from certainty, and that's what bothered Holt. Graves dialed the number. He turned slightly, not to the side, but so he could hear better. When the other end picked up, he spoke briefly. "Hey, it's me. I'm at North Wilk Road, Arlington Heights. I need you here right now." Holt stood still, listening intently to every word. His expression changed gradually from mockery to wariness. Graves continued, his voice still even. No call, no legitimate reason. The body cam is running. The final statement wasn't a threat, it was a fact put in the right place. Holt stepped forward. End the call now. Graves didn't look at him. I'll stay right here, he said into the phone. Thanks. The call ended. Graves hung up, holding the phone in his hand, not putting it away. Holt looked at him, trying to regain control. You think calling friends is going to save you? They're not friends, Graves dapped. They're professionals. Holt's shoulder radio crackled, not a confirmation, just a signal that units were being deployed. That made Holt uneasy. He liked to be in control, but now the situation was spiraling out of his grasp. Stay right there, Holt said, his voice lower than before. Don't move. I haven't moved, Graves replied. Around them, more people stopped to watch. More phones were raised. The sidewalk suddenly became crowded. And then, from afar, a sound rang out, initially very faint, but unmistakable. The whistle. Not just one, but more. Graves stood still. Holt turned his head towards the sound. They both understood. Things were about to change. The first patrol car emerged from the end of the street, its lights still on as it slowed down and pulled over. Almost immediately, a second one followed closely behind, stopping at a diagonal corner, creating a tight space around the sidewalk. The car door swung open. A female officer stepped out first. Officer Leanna Brooks. Her eyes quickly scanned the scene, Holt's position, the posture of the man standing still on the sidewalk, and the group of people watching across the street. Before anyone could say anything, another car pulled up behind them. Sergeant Paul Wenstrom stepped out, his hand on the radio, walking quickly but calmly. What do we have? Wenstrom asked, his voice low and controlled. Holt immediately took half a step forward, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Over here, Sarge, he said. This guy's claiming to be federal. Won't comply. Possible impersonation. Malik Graves didn't interrupt. He stood still, his hands hanging naturally, his phone put away, his badge still tucked into his jacket. Wenstrom looked at him. Sir. Graves Gutdo. I'm Special Agent Malik Graves, FBI, Illinois. I was walking to dinner when Officer Holt stopped me without cause and refused verification. Holt snorted. See? There it is again. Wenstrom raised his hand, not to silence Graves, but to de-escalate the situation. I'll hear both sides, he said. Sir, start from the beginning. Graves recounts it, briefly. No commentary, no superfluous emotion. The time, the place, the words, the reaction. Wenstrom Quay sung Holt. Is that accurate? Holt hesitated for a moment. He wasn't cooperating, he said. That's not what I asked, Wenstrom dapped. The atmosphere on the sidewalk became subdued. The phones across the street continued recording. For the first time since the pause began, Holt was not the pace-setter, and that embarrassed him. Sergeant Wenstrom turned back towards Malik Graves. Sir, do you have your credentials on you right now? Yes, Graves replied. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out his leather wallet again. He opened it, held it steady, and pointed it towards the commander. Unlike Holt, Wenstrom stepped forward and accepted the badge with both hands. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't judgmental. He examined the name, photograph, seal, and serial number carefully. His gaze lingered longer, on details Holt had never read before. Officer Brooks stood slightly to the side, observing Holt. She said nothing, but the tension in his shoulders was palpable. Dispatch, Wenstrom Neuvau Radio. Run a federal credential verification. I'll give you the number. Holt immediately interrupted. Sarge, those can be fake. I've seen. Enough. Wenstrom Cottongang. You've done enough talking. The radio went silent for a few seconds. Those seconds dragged on slower than usual. Then a voice answered. Confirmed. Credential is valid. Wenstrom nodded, then returned the badge to Graves. Thank you for your patience, sir. Graves replied, I wasn't given much choice. Wenstrom turned to Holt. His voice wasn't loud, but it was deep. Why was he stopped? Holt opened his mouth, then closed it again. He glanced quickly around the street, as if still searching for a reason that never existed. He was out of place, Holt said finally. Wentrom narrowed his eyes. Definite that. Holt did not reply. Was there a call? Wenstrom ho teep. No, Officer Brooks replied. Any description? No. Suspicious behavior? Brooks shook his head. Wenstrom kwe lai Holt. Then why was he stopped? Holt nut kan. I was doing my job. No, Wenstrom said, his voice even. You were freelancing. A phone across the street zoomed in closer. Wenstrom tiptook. You refused supervisor verification when federal credentials were presented. Holt didn't deny it. He just nodded very slightly. That's a problem, Wenstrom Noy. Graves spoke up then, not loudly, but clearly. Sergeant, I'm documenting this encounter. Wentrom nodded. Understood. Holt spun around. You don't need to do that. Graves looked straight at him. You already did this. Wenstrom took a step forward. Holt. Step back. Holt hesitated. Now, for the first time since the stop began, Holt backed away from the man he had blocked on the sidewalk. Power had slipped from his hands, not by shouting, but by the confirmation of the truth. Sergeant Wenstrom turned back towards Malik Graves. Sir, you're free to go. The words were spoken clearly, without hesitation. But Graves didn't leave immediately. Not yet, he said. Wenstrom stopped and looked him straight in the eye. Yes, sir. I want this encounter formally documented. Graves Noy, Jeong Deo. And I want a copy of the body camera footage preserved. Wenstrom nodded immediately. That will be done. Holt stood behind them, breathing heavily. This is ridiculous, he said softly, but loud enough to be heard. Wenstrom turned around, his eyes cold. You're on thin ice. Graves spoke up, not addressing Holt, but the commander. Sergeant, this wasn't a misunderstanding. Wenstrom didn't interrupt. This was profiling. Graves Noy tip. I was stopped because of perception, not behavior. Wenstrom remained silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Understood. Graves looked at him. May I have the report number? Wentrom read the numbers aloud. Graves memorized them. No pen and paper needed. Holt shook his head, his voice irritated. You're blowing this out of proportion. Graves turned around, looking directly at Holt for the first time since things had calmed down. You decided who I was before you decided what was legal. Holt did not respond. The patrol car's lights were still flashing. The onlookers gradually dispersed. A few phones were still held up, recording the final moments. Graves turned and walked away. Not towards the restaurant, but towards his car. The stop on the sidewalk is over. But the incident hasn't happened yet. No formal apology was offered on the spot. There was no way to rewind what had been recorded. From that moment on, the encounter was no longer just between two people on the street. It has become a record. The following morning, the internal review process began. At exactly 9 a.m., Officer Brandon Keegan Holt's body cam footage was extracted, flagged, and forwarded to the surveillance department. Radio logs were cross-referenced. The timestamps were checked minute by minute. Sergeant Paul Wenstrom submitted a supplemental report stating, there was no service call, no suspect, no suspicious behavior, and no reasonable grounds to stop the pedestrian. What particularly caught the attention of the Special Investigation Team wasn't what Holt said after his superiors arrived, but that's what he said earlier. The tone of voice, the sequence of actions, the unfounded request for documents, the refusal to verify when a federal badge was presented, and the way he called someone standing still and speaking calmly, non-compliant. Within 48 hours, Holt was placed on administrative leave. Malik Graves has remained silent in the media. He hasn't posted anything. He hasn't made any statements. He did exactly what a federal agent is trained to do: compile reports, archive documents, and hire lawyers specializing in civil rights and abuse of law enforcement. The city initially called it a misunderstanding, but the video disagrees with that term. In the video, Holt never provides a legitimate reason for the stop. He relies on presence. He relies on location. And ultimately, he relies on feeling. A federal lawsuit was filed shortly thereafter. Allegations included violations of the Fourth Amendment, unlawful arrest and detention. It also alleged violations of the principle of equal protection. The amount is clearly stated in the records. $4.7 million. When the interrogation sessions began, Holt struggled to explain his actions under oath. He failed to identify any specific behavior that aroused suspicion. He could not explain why he refused to verify information with his superiors. And he did not give a convincing answer when asked whether race played a role. Independent experts concluded that Holt's behavior deviated from standard patrol procedures in several respects. The language used was consistent with the profiler pattern observed in previous cases. The city changed its stance. A settlement agreement was quietly signed. $4.7 million was paid from the city budget. There was no written admission of wrongdoing, but there were consequences. The discretionary arrest policy was reviewed. Prejudice detection training was expanded to be mandatory. Officer Brandon Keegan Holt did not return to street duty. Several months later, his disciplinary record was finalized. His badge was returned. His name was removed from the list of serving officers. Malik Graves has returned to his job. He continues to serve as a federal agent. In a brief statement through his lawyer, he said, "The goal isn't attention, it's accountability. That dinner on North Wilk Road never happened. A decision made in minutes not based on law, but on feeling set off an irreversible chain of events. It's not because it's rare, it's because this time, it was recorded. And when common sense is backed by power, the price to pay is cat dollars, sept million. If this story makes you uncomfortable, then it has done its job. Subscribe to the channel to follow more real-life stories where the truth needs no exaggeration because it is weighty enough on its own.